This is the story of the princes in the tower, and the man who may have stolen their future. In the summer of 1483, two young brothers were taken to the Tower of London. They were the sons of a king. The older boy, just 12 years old, had been proclaimed Edward V of England. His younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, was 9. They were moved into royal lodgings in the Tower as part of preparations for Edward's upcoming coronation. But that coronation never happened. Soon after their arrival, the doors began to close around them. The boys were seen less frequently. Their servants were dismissed. By the end of the summer, they had vanished from public view entirely. No formal statement was ever issued. No official search, no funerals. Just silence. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had been named Lord Protector. Weeks after the boys entered the Tower, he declared them illegitimate, seized the throne for himself, and became Richard III. What happened inside those walls has never been proven. Were the boys murdered? If so, on whose orders? Did Richard act to secure his claim? Were there other forces at work? Political rivals, loyalists, opportunists? It is one of the most enduring mysteries in English history. Two princes disappeared, a crown changed hands, and the truth was buried beneath layers of rumor, fear, and silence. Edward V was born into power. His father, Edward IV, had seized the throne through strength of arms and held it through charm, cunning, and a series of uneasy alliances. By the 1470s, the Yorkist dynasty seemed secure. The young prince was raised in luxury, educated carefully, and prepared from childhood to rule. But in April 1483, everything changed. Edward IV died suddenly at the age of 40. His eldest son was just 12 years old. The boy was staying in Ludlow, far from London, when the news arrived. Almost immediately, his uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector, a role his late brother had reportedly intended for him. Gloucester had a reputation for loyalty, competence, and modest ambition. But in the weeks that followed, his behavior would raise serious questions. Edward began the journey to London for his coronation. But before he could arrive, his progress was interrupted. Richard met him along the way, surrounded by armed men. The prince's escort, including his maternal uncle and half-brother, were arrested. They would later be executed without trial. From that moment forward, Edward was in his uncle's custody. When he arrived in London, the atmosphere had shifted. The new king no longer moved freely. His coronation, originally planned for early May, was postponed. The official reason was that more time was needed for preparations. But behind closed doors, political gears were turning. Richard claimed to be acting in the boy's best interests, but his actions suggested otherwise. He took control of the royal council. He placed loyal men in key positions, and within weeks, he announced a shocking revelation. Edward V and his brother were illegitimate. According to Richard, a secret pre-contract between Edward IV and another woman had invalidated the marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, and thus their children had no right to the throne. Parliament endorsed the claim. The public, confused and uneasy, largely stayed silent. And on July 6, 1483, Richard was crowned king. Edward V was never seen in public again. After Richard III's coronation, the two princes remained inside the Tower of London. Officially, it was still a royal residence, not a prison. But their presence there was no longer tied to ceremony or protection. It was silence. For a time, people believed the coronation had simply been postponed. Some expected Edward to be restored once political tensions cooled. But as weeks passed with no appearance, no announcement, and no word from the boys, concern turned to dread. Reports suggest that the princes were seen playing in the Tower Gardens in June. By mid-July, sightings stopped. Their staff had been dismissed. Their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, remained in sanctuary at Westminster, powerless to act. Rumors spread quickly, but no one dared speak too loudly. What happened to the boys inside the tower is still unknown. There was no investigation, no statement from the king. Their disappearance was gradual, deliberate. Not an event, but a vanishing. Theories multiplied. Some believed Richard had them quietly murdered to solidify his reign. Others speculated they were poisoned, smothered in their beds, or killed by hired agents. One account, decades later, claimed the boys were buried at the foot of a staircase within the tower itself, though this was never proven. Still others wondered if they had been hidden, spirited away under false names, perhaps raised in secret by sympathizers. Two men would later claim to be one of the princes, both gaining international attention. Their stories were persuasive, but their identities were never fully confirmed. Richard III never addressed the matter publicly. He made no official declaration about their fate. He simply ruled as if they had never existed. But England remembered. Whispers followed Richard everywhere. Nobles grew uneasy. Commoners grew suspicious. The question hung in the air like a fog. What happened to the rightful king? And why was no one answering? With the princes gone from view, Richard III's hold on the throne appeared secure, at least on the surface. His coronation had been formal, his claim supported by Parliament through a document known as Titulus Regius, which declared Edward IV's children illegitimate. Legally, Richard was king, but legitimacy on paper is not the same as loyalty in hearts and minds. The disappearance of the princes cast a long shadow. Even among those who had accepted Richard's rise, there was discomfort. Few believed his explanation about their illegitimacy, and fewer still trusted the silence that followed. Meanwhile, discontent brewed beneath the surface. Powerful nobles who had once supported Edward IV began to shift uneasily in their allegiances. Margaret Beaufort, a Lancastrian noblewoman and the mother of Henry Tudor, saw an opportunity. She opened secret communications with Elizabeth Woodville, mother of the vanished princes, and the two women formed an alliance. It was a calculated move. If Henry Tudor, currently in exile, were to return and marry Elizabeth's eldest daughter, Elizabeth of York, it would unite the warring houses of Lancaster and York. It would also give the crown to someone untainted by the mystery of the Tower. The idea gained traction. Disaffected nobles, former allies of Richard, and even foreign powers began backing Henry Tudor's claim. In just over a year, Richard's realm began to crack. As his support weakened, rebellions broke out. Some small and scattered, others more serious. Richard responded swiftly, crushing uprisings with force, executing traitors. But each act of suppression only deepened the suspicion that he ruled through fear, not trust. What had begun as a smooth transition had become a reign haunted by two small ghosts. The crown on Richard's head might have been heavy with jewels, but it was also heavy with guilt. Whether or not he ordered the deaths of the princes, the court and the country saw him as responsible. And in the brutal logic of medieval politics, perception could be as deadly as proof. The boy king was gone. His younger brother, too. The throne was occupied. But England was restless. Far across the Channel, a new threat was preparing to return home. By 1485, Richard III's grip on the throne was weakening. The legitimacy of his rule had never fully taken hold. Whispers of the prince's disappearance had become an open wound, infecting public trust. Nobles defected quietly. Rumors spread that divine judgment was coming. Across the Channel, Henry Tudor gathered support. Backed by discontented Yorkists, Lancastrian loyalists, and foreign allies, he sailed from France with a modest army. His claim to the throne was tenuous, built more on opportunity than blood. But he promised stability. He promised to marry Elizabeth of York and end the Wars of the Roses once and for all. Richard knew the threat was real. He marched north to meet it. On August 22, 1485, the two forces clashed at Bosworth Field. Richard led from the front. He fought like a man with something to prove, charging directly at Henry in an attempt to end the battle with a single blow. But in the chaos, his allies faltered. Some stood aside, others turned against him. Richard was surrounded, pulled from his horse, and killed in the mud and blood of the battlefield. His crown, said to have rolled under a hawthorn bush, was found and placed on Henry Tudor's head that same day. Richard III became the last English king to die in battle. With him, the Plantagenet dynasty ended. Henry VII ascended to the throne. He married Elizabeth of York, as promised, uniting the feuding houses. The Tudor dynasty began, ushering in a new era. Henry made no effort to investigate the fate of the princes. He had little to gain by reopening the case. Whether he believed Richard guilty or not, the silence served him just as well. No witnesses came forward. No bodies were found during their lifetime. No confession ever surfaced. But that didn't stop the rumors, or the theories, from multiplying. The most widely accepted theory is simple and brutal. The boys were murdered, and their uncle, King Richard III, ordered it. He had motive. Their continued existence was a threat to his claim. He had opportunity. They were in his custody inside the tower. And he had the power. No one could have stopped him. But motive alone is not proof. Some historians argue that Richard may not have seen them as an immediate threat. After all, he had Parliament's backing. He could have kept them locked away indefinitely. Killing them would risk turning public opinion against him, which, as we know, eventually happened. So if not Richard, then who? One alternative theory suggests the Duke of Buckingham, once Richard's ally, may have acted without the king's consent. Ambitious and unpredictable, Buckingham may have seen the boys as a threat to his own influence. His later rebellion against Richard only deepened suspicion. Another theory points to Henry Tudor himself. Could his supporters have arranged the murder after Richard's fall, to prevent the princes from becoming rallying figures against Tudor rule? It's unlikely, given the timing, but not impossible. By the time Henry took the throne in 1485, the boys had already vanished. Then there's the theory that they weren't killed at all, that one or both escaped. This gave rise to impostors in later years, most famously Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. His story shook Henry VII's court and gained support from foreign rulers. But after his capture, Warbeck confessed to being a fraud, though whether it was genuine or forced remains debated. In 1674, nearly 2 centuries after the disappearance, workers at the Tower of London discovered a wooden box buried beneath a staircase. Inside were the skeletal remains of 2 children. The bones were reburied at Westminster Abbey, believed to be those of the princes, but no forensic confirmation has ever been made. Centuries have passed since 2 boys disappeared behind the walls of the Tower of London, but the story has never faded. It has become one of the great unsolved mysteries of English history. not just for what happened, but for what it represents. The disappearance of Edward V and his brother Richard wasn't just a tragedy. It was a turning point, a rupture in the trust between monarchy and people, between bloodline and crown. It marked the end of the Plantagenets and set the stage for the Tudors, whose legacy would shape England for a century. Historians continue to argue. Some defend Richard III as a man falsely accused, the victim of Tudor propaganda. Others believe the evidence, circumstantial though it may be, points directly to him. Shakespeare, writing over 100 years later, immortalized Richard as a villain, hunched, bitter, and murderous. But history written by victors is rarely gentle with the defeated. In 2012, Richard III's remains were discovered beneath a parking lot in Leicester. DNA confirmed his identity. His body was reburied with dignity, and his story reopened in the public imagination. Once again, people began asking, who was this man, really? A ruthless usurper? Or a misunderstood king surrounded by enemies? And what of the boys? The remains found in the Tower in 1674 still rest at Westminster Abbey in an urn marked only with a plaque. To this day, they have not been subjected to modern forensic testing, out of respect or fear of what the results might say. The tower still stands. Tourists pass the spot where the princes were last seen. The windows are small, the stones cold, but the questions remain alive. Were they murdered, hidden, betrayed? Or did the real story slip through the cracks, lost between power, politics, and time?